Our material has a basic color and that's it. And you can see it's all very shiny. There's no bump going on. It doesn't look very good. This is not a complete material. So showing that material here, we can see that all we have is one bitmap lookup, pumped into the base color, and that's it. We need to be able to control roughness, and we need to be able to control bump. We could just try using the base color map and plug it in and maybe do some color correction, but you're going to find that you're going to get results that you're not expecting. It won't look that good. We want the wood to be more rough, and we want the metals to be less rough. And so in fact, it's actually going to give us the exact opposite here. Because the wood is a dark value, that means that our roughness will be turned down where the wood is. Now we're getting some variation out of it, which is nice, but we've got dull metals and shiny woods, and not exactly what we're looking for. So we're going to want to do some work in Photoshop to be able to make specific maps to drive these, and then be able to color correct those a little bit to get exactly what we're after. In Photoshop, let's take all of our base color maps here and just put them into a grouping again so that we can keep things organized a little bit better. And we'll just call this base color. And, again, if you wanted, you could give that some sort of color so you can see what's going on. And unfortunately, it's then colored everything else again. So I think we can override those again with our colors here. So I'll just go in and make sure that these are all different so we can see them and have an understanding of what we're working with. So with that being said, I'm going to copy this whole thing up because it's got all the texture in it that we want. I'm just going to turn that off. And first I'm going to call this roughness. And we'll work on the roughness with these. Now, right at the very top of roughness, because roughness value is just a grayscale value, we can turn this grayscale. Now, I'm not going to get into channel packing and all sorts that somebody might watch and say, what about? Well, this is a real beginner tutorial. So let's, black and white at the top, and I'll put it right at the very top. So everything inside of roughness is being turned to a grayscale for me so we can kind of see what's going on. So in this case, anything that's white is going to become very rough. Anything that is, dark is going to do the exact opposite. So, should we invert these? Well, if we were just to invert these and flip them over, it might give us what we're looking for a roughness map. So let's find out how close we are with this and what kind of values we're getting out of this. Because, now we're going to have shiny rivets. That might be good, right? So let's see how close this is. And the only way to really do that is by going export it. We're going to export it to, in this case, just teapot R for the roughness map. And I'm going to overwrite that. And of course, I've got my wireframe turned off. And let's go and pull that down. And we're going to go in and load up that roughness map and connect up the color. If you notice, I didn't have to go and have this open, hitting H. You can if you want H. This doesn't work as well, this little plus minus thing here. Use H and it hides all unused connections so you can still see them. But if you just click and hold at the top, you can still get access to the outputs, or click and top on the other side, you can get access to the inputs, which is kind of handy. So I'm going to hide that off with H. So this will now be the roughness, controlling the roughness. So that's actually not that bad. You can see that the woods are rough, and that you can see that the metals are starting to look shiny. Now they should have some variation to them because there is variation in the texture. So when we look at that, you can see we've got variation of roughnesses. And so it might actually be giving us a pretty good result as it is right now. Now, we can play with that a little more. So if we pull out of the roughness map and we go into OSL, and we grab a color correct, and we do a color correction on this, and that's going to be coming out of the or into the input from the output back into roughness. I'm just going to hide all the others with H again, and I'm just going to make these smaller because we don't need them. And if you want to organize your maps, select the root, hit C. It'll organize them all, line them up for you. So with that being said, we can now take a look at the settings of that color correction and play around with some things. So if we made it brighter, you'd see everything gets really rough. If we made it darker, you can see the woods start getting shinier. Okay. If I push contrast, I might be able to get some interesting solutions too out of it, you know, and then playing with some of this, right? Maybe getting a little more sheen into the wood or whatever. You know, playing with contrast. And, you know, in Photoshop, I could then start playing with the individual elements. You know, I'm close, I'm not bad. It's you know, going pretty good at this stage. But in Photoshop, we could go in and do some color corrections on the elements themselves because we have them broken down. So we've got each of these pieces that we could go in and do some color correcting to see if we could get it, you know, looking more like what we want. In fact, I've already got brightness contrast on these. And so we could make the dirty areas, you know, more rough. Right now we could, you know, so because right now maybe they're not enough. They've got, so there's grime areas, so I can play with that. I've got these, you know, these Revit areas, and so we could even make these darker if we wanted. We could paint over them, however you want to do it. Same thing with the woods. But we're going to call that pretty good so far. Let's just grab this whole thing and let's copy it up now, and we'll call this bump. And we'll make this a bump channel now and do something similar. So what's the bump going to look like, and how much bump should there be? You know, I don't know that we're going to need the invert for this, but we might want to even things out. So I'm just going to get rid of that invert, and we can then take a look at, you know, maybe something like hue saturation, or, you know, brightness contrast values overall. And we can play around with those and even out that brightness contrast, because bump is going to push up where it's white. Okay, and again, we might want to play around now very specifically in areas to get things. But let's play with some of these values again and see what happens. And let's output this to the Rivet B for bump. So in here, I'm going to copy this down, and we're going to change that up to read the bump. Oh, I think that was the R again. So the bump, sorry. And again, we could output it through the out into, you know, color correction again, just so that we can mess with that color correction, and out and into the bump. Now you can play with your bump in a couple places. One, in the bottom of the shader itself, you've got the amount of bump that we've got going. So you can see that we've got some bump happening now, and it starts making it a little better. But look at how bumpy the metals are. That just doesn't look good. I want the wood to be bumpy. You know, I want some nice bump going on in the woods here. And I've got actually pretty good looking, you know, bump happening there, but the metals look ridiculous. So this is where we're going to have to go in and make some very specific changes to all of these metals to get rid of it all. And so in the, you know, this area here where these are, we're going to have to sort of pull the contrast down. So we've got brightness contrast. And this is going to be in the coppers, and then we've got the brass. I think I've got a brightness contrast in there. And one thing I find is use legacy will get you a better option. If it gets you more range anyway. So I want that bottom to be shiny, but I want its contrast to come down. I want to get rid of those sort of details a little bit. So let's try that. And then in the copper too, in that brightness contrast, let's go with the legacy. And let's try and pull some of the details out and get a little less detail going in that bump, you know, so that it isn't bumping things as much in places. Still might be too much. We might want to do some color overlays and pull that down. But again, let's go back down, export this out to the bump. And let's go back to our model, and it will have updated. And you know, you can see it's pulling it down a little bit. So let's do some overlays of some color and see if we can sort of desaturate it even more in here. And so we could, at the top of here, add a layer. And then I'm going to make that layer work only on that copper again. I'm going to fill it with white. So that'll be Control Delete. And you can see that obviously gets it pretty good. You know, again, we can play around with soft lighting it, or some sort of blend mode we think might be able to get us there. You know, maybe even screening it over, maybe playing with the opacity, and let a little bit come through. So we want it pretty, could just be a gray tone we're using, for this, because this is the copper portion here, and these are the rivets. So maybe if we went down below those and let those rivets, bump, right? Because this is the bump here. So we're trying to just do it on those ones there, and then I'm going to pull it down onto that base one as well. That's the brass, and see what it does. It's working pretty good on that brass, and there's no rivets on that, so maybe I'll put it there. That's should be pretty good. This will be bumping up more than this, but it is kind of relative because they are two different maps. Now I could just go to a gray tone and take some sort of gray tone and fill it in there and try and blend that in some way. And again, I've got it on screen. I could just put it on normal and let it do that, for instance. And so on this one, I could fill those as well. I'll put it back on normal and, play around with getting that midtone. Now these should bump up nicely, okay, all these rivets, because they're white, and so they're going to push up, and the little black areas look like they push down, believe it or not, and then the midtone grays in between. Let's see what that does, and it's going to be a little bit of back and forth each time to see what it is doing. So you can see now we're getting more of our sheen back with a little bit of sort of roughness to it. It kind of looks like the rivets are pushing out a little bit. And there we go. We've got more of a complete material happening that we can play around with and try and make it look a little bit better. So there's sort of texturing 101 for you.